What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabril, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well out there.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, what you been playing?
Yeah, in the middle of a few things. Obviously, we have the big one, which I don't have a ton more to say. Final Fantasy 16, obviously, larger journey, a larger game than I expected to be jumping into. But I know last time I was slightly more warm on it. I actually feel like I like it a whole lot more now. I kind of see the systems of it. It's one of these games that do keep evolving. You know, it's not to the point where, you know, to compare it like Final Fantasy 13, where you got to get 20 hours in before it gets good. 16 definitely gets good really quickly when it gets its own identity. Especially when you start getting a couple more powers, the combat gets a little deeper. It does have this feeling of missing Final Fantasy aspects. You know, there is no party management really. The equipment is really just what is green, and then whatever has a green arrow, I equipped it because there's no real trade-offs, and you're really just focusing on what you do. You don't have to worry about the other characters, any pets, anything like that. And it's really interesting to see just a lot of these themes, though, really just fully fleshed out. I'm liking that, especially in a world where, you know, Game of Thrones doesn't really exist anymore, and we don't really have anything that really feels like this. At least in my realm, I haven't played or dived into anything like that. So seeing this sort of realm, all these terms, all these, you know, wars, and just this sort of themes and the world that they've built is really engaging. I think I've come along to all the characters. I really like everyone, and I'm just surprised on how large this game's become. I think if I checked this morning, I think I'm like 20 something hours in. I'm only about halfway, which is nuts. I do know someone who completed it, and they did, I think, a little extra, you know, almost all the missions. They're like 70 hours in. I just can't believe this is a game I have to play for 70 hours almost to complete, which I'm not terrible. I'm not super mad at, but just especially for a Final Fantasy, on the top of that, an action game, it's a big game for me. But I'm really liking it. I'm really liking what they're doing with this stuff, especially when the game starts to get its own identity with the hunts and more of the combat and combos and switching of powers and summons, and seeing all that start to flourish and be the core of the game. I really start to understand this. I do, but the more I like this game, the more I see why it's so polarizing and why so many people are having issues with it. And I get it both ways. But in a world where Square is still doing Octopath Traveler, the Triangle Strategy, Path Traveler 2, those hardcore Final Fantasy bones still exist. It's just they're elsewhere now. So it's a really weird place to see it. It's one of those games I'm going to still be trucking through. I think until I beat it, this might be the last time I discuss it, because I don't know how long it's going to take me to beat it, just because it is such a large game. The only other game I've really been playing, and it's not anything new, is I've spent some more time with Street Fighter 6. Obviously, a little bit more of the World Tour mode, which you've spoken to, and I've agreed with everything you've said. It's just such a wacky time.
Yeah.
But I've spent obviously a lot more time online. I've joined a couple tournaments, a couple factions, doing a couple things in ranked, and it was weird at first because it's such a weird polarizing thing where there's basically two factions. There's people who stick by modern controls and people who don't, and it's been a weird time for that. But in itself, when I'm talking just gameplay, I don't think many Street Fighter games even come close to the addictiveness, the fun that is the game, from the combos to the characters, just to the layouts of the maps, and I'm, you know, in sense of placement, closing the gaps. There is this really good back and forth sort of fun stuff that I haven't felt in Street Fighter in a long time. You're thinking maybe Alpha, even Third Strike days.
Yeah.
So I don't have too much more to say. That just that the game is so good and so just engaging. But the people who fight about, once you start getting a little bit deeper and higher ranks, you see less and less of the modern controls, which makes a lot of sense, because the modern controls do have, and it's, you know, they've confirmed it and they've talked about it, there is a lot of trade-offs for modern controls. There's certain combos you just won't be able to do. There's certain nerfs that they've been doing with it as well. So I don't mind modern controls because it brings a bigger group of people to the community. And then from there, I see very quickly the people who master the modern controls definitely start to translate a little bit more to the classic controls. So there is a guidance there. I will never be mad or upset with a game doing something that's going to bring more people in. You know, that's the same thing we were talking about in Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy's done some stuff that's made it a little bit more mainstream, and it's going to bring the sort of casuals in. But it's not to the point where it's not an auto battle system in Street Fighter. You know, when I've lost to someone who's using modern controls, it's because I lost. It's not because, you know, they just pushed, you know, one button down and they were able to do a combo. It's just, you know, I messed up my combo input, I messed up my timing, I tried to grab when I shouldn't. It's never been that big of a verdict thing in my opinion. So that's really the only two big things I've been playing. I'm sure I've been playing something else, but it doesn't really come to mind. So that's all I've been playing. What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could kind of piggyback right after you because I played a little bit of Street Fighter recently as well, and you know that I beat World Tour, and that those late game fights were really challenging. So kind of getting to a point where I was proficient enough, I really decided, I was like, okay, well, like if they introduce this new control scheme, which I would imagine is probably not going to go anywhere for a bit, like let me try to figure it out. And obviously I feel like those first couple hours using the modern controls, like there's an ease to it, but there was something about it that I found particularly challenging because all my muscle memory was gone. Not that I had a ton, but like there's, you know, having played pretty much every entry as it comes out, there is a bit of a rhythm you get to it. So having all that reset, and so kind of going through World Tour, I felt like I became, I would never say mastered, but I definitely got a lot more proficient with modern controls than I was initially, and I kind of went online, and it's so interesting. I think just the rhythm difference between like playing with modern controls versus fighting somebody who's like not doing modern controls. But you know, I like the modern controls because it really kind of allows you to hone in on the timing. I feel like you can really lock in on like the call and response type stuff. And you still, you know, have to focus on executions and all the different combos that you can try to execute and stuff like that. But I think that was like a big problem I always had with Street Fighter, is just I could never get the timing right on it. And I felt like modern controls kind of opened that up a little bit for me. And that's a good thing about modern controls, is again, it modernizes it, but it's not necessarily, I disagree with people who are like, it's easier. I don't necessarily feel that way. I think it could be easier in the way that, like, yeah, if you take a younger person and you put like Street Fighter 2 in front of them and then this, yeah, they're probably going to jump at the 6 a lot more naturally. But I think that's more of like a where games have progressed thing. But yeah, no, that game is so good. I love it. It's probably my favorite since, yeah, Third Strike, around like Alpha and Third Strike, around that era. Is probably the last time that I really locked in on. Like, I liked 5 and 4, but I think this game is a hell of a lot better than them, to be honest. So yeah, no, this one's super solid. I beat Final Fantasy 16. I kind of just like banged it out.
There you go.
So I beat it at 43 hours, something around there. And I did everything that was presented to me. So I wouldn't say I like 100% completed it because I didn't pop a platinum. But I got a lot of the trophies, and basically every side quest that was presented to me and every notorious mark that popped up, I did. And so yeah, I finished around 42 hours. I've heard people going into the 60, 70 territory, and I think a lot of that will be like, well, obviously, I mean, it depends how much you're watching the cutscenes during the like side quests. Like I blazed through that. Like some of those side quests, I'm like, hell no. Like so that definitely cut down the time a little bit as well. And I was just kind of like moving through things. And also like how much you're cranking up the difficulty. I feel like if you're really hampering yourself with some of the equipped items, which definitely I would suggest taking off some of them because the auto executions make the game. I mean, if you're cool with like really, really easy games, then I think it's not a problem. But there are some things that they make that like are damn near like toggling options to beat the game for you. And so if you toggle those off and then you crank the difficulty up, I could totally see why the time would inflate at that point. But for the most part, I could say pretty confidently, anywhere from 40 to 45 hours, you can see everything. I even popped a trophy the last time I played, which literally said like you've been to everywhere on the map. So I've done everything pretty much, and I think you could bang it out around that time. So it's a long game, but it's not like prohibitively long. I would say it's shorter than a Persona for sure.
Yeah.
But no, the game is brilliant. Now that I finished it, I could say pretty concretely, it's definitely probably my second favorite game of the year. I don't think it quite beats Zelda for me, but it's pretty much far ahead of everybody else. The story is just gorgeous. It's so good, and the characters only get better as the time progresses. And I think at first I got a little nervous because you have this super dark, grounded fantasy that it kind of sets up with, and then it gets very Final Fantasy at times with some of the background lore, and a lot of that is not really deeply presented to you until about like 20 hours in or something like that. So I was a little concerned about how well they'd kind of work together and if it'd feel jarring. And I feel like because the way it's presented over time, and there are some narrative choices that they make to kind of take certain things off the table and focus in on other things, I think everything works very well, especially in that late game. So yeah, Final Fantasy 16, really, really good. And then lastly, I've been playing Master Detective Archives Raincode. And I told you about this game when they announced it.
Yeah.
So this is, for anybody who doesn't know, the next game from the Danganronpa team, basically. I don't know if they're done with Danganronpa, but this for sure is, I think, a new direction for them. It's serving as a spiritual successor. And the reason I say that is because there's so much Danganronpa in this, but this game is so much crazier. So you can tell that they're like taking everything that they did previously and building upon that and going crazy. Like you could tell like maybe they felt a little restrained by, just the narrative that was set up there. They had to finish up a story. And this one, they've just gone insane on. There's all this different disparate kind of imagery that they bring in. It's kind of a hard game to describe, but basically to the way that Danganronpa is like a mystery death game, this is a detective case game, but not in your Ace Attorney type way, not in your Professor Layton type way. It's more Professor Layton in terms of its just general traversal and how you investigate scenes, but it's very Danganronpa in the way that there are physical constructs of mental battles that are going on. You'd see similar things in like a Persona, but like as you're figuring out the case, something that is a blocker for you in terms of figuring out the mystery is a physical thing that you have to work past. It has a lot of the great, campy, over-the-top vocal deliveries that you would see in a Danganronpa. And also, it has puzzles and mysteries at time that I don't know how somebody could figure out without a guide. Maybe I'm stupid. I don't know. There are things in that game that I'm like, I'm sitting there like, what? I don't understand how like I could answer this question, and then I look it up and I'm like, oh, like it logically makes sense, but I don't understand. Like you would have to be a detective. Like I'm like I don't understand how people are figuring this out. So God bless all of you guys that are either doing it without a guide or figuring it or writing the guides, because I have no clue how you guys are doing this. I'm like Danganronpa, I'm able to make it through a solid amount of it, but I'm inevitably once or twice a chapter I'm bumping into things that I'm like I have no clue. Like I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. So yeah, no, the game is really good. It's only $60, so it's not a full $70 release. But yeah, and it's Switch exclusive, which is actually pretty interesting as well.
Was just gonna ask, is it only on Switch still?
Yes, right now it's only on Switch. Nothing else is announced. I wouldn't be surprised if you see like a PC thing later on the line, but for right now, yeah, it's only on Switch. And okay. Because I looked on Steam and I was like, because I would have preferred to play it on Steam Deck, but because it's like if I'm gonna do it handheld, might as well do it on the like slightly more powerful one. But no, it was only on Switch and it runs pretty good. It's not a technically demanding game, so there's not really much opportunity for things to go down. The only, I guess, concession is that the visuals are a little blurry. And the thing is, you could totally tell that they did a stability trade-off there. That's my guess. Is it runs pretty solidly. There's no insane frame dipping or anything like that. The cutscenes run nice, but the resolution stays on the lower side. And I'm okay with that, but anybody who is more concerned about visuals, you might want to hold out, because I would, again, assume that this is going to pop up on Steam or EGS or something like that. But yeah, no, the game is really, really solid. Definitely recommend it. And especially if you like Danganronpa, this is going to be a no-brainer. I seriously doubt you'll have any issues with this one. If you didn't like Danganronpa, this one I don't think is going to fix too much for it. The only major difference in terms of kind of like a technical upgrade that this got from there is that you can like physically run around in an area with your character, as opposed to that kind of like first-person view that you get in Danganronpa. This one goes full third person. Danganronpa pivoted into third person, something with the later stuff, but yeah, this game kind of opens up with that. But the cutscenes, the art style is exactly the same. The cutscenes are beautifully done, but they're full like CG rendered instead of that interesting like 2D paper thing that they do in Danganronpa. Yeah. They've done away with that. That's not in there, but the art style is complete like CG cutscenes, fully voice acted. Yeah, it's just really, really solid. So highly recommend that to anybody, especially if you're looking for something to play on your Switch. And because anybody who's played a Spike Chunsoft game knows that the color palettes they use are kind of ridiculous and over the top in the visuals. I think the Switch OLED is a nice place to play that as well. It kind of makes those colors pop. Again, the only thing I would wish is that maybe the visuals were able to be a little sharper. However, I will always take stability over visual fidelity any day. So those are pretty much everything I've been playing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Raincoat, because I remember we were both excited for this game, and it just sort of was off my radar. I was just made aware of it Friday when a friend of mine who knew I was excited for it was like, "Did you get this?" And I'm like, "Not out yet." He's like, "Yeah, it's been out." But between Zelda, Final Fantasy, Street Fighter, it just fell through the cracks, So it is something I have my eye on when I complete something. That'll be my next one, hopefully, to sort of take charge.
Yeah, I was literally waiting for like the moment I finished Final Fantasy 16. I was like, because Raincoat, I knew this game is not going to be short. I know it's going to require me to like lock in and sit on the couch and bang this out. So I was like, I need to get everything out of the way. But I did know that I did have a window, because I was like, come fall, like it's done again. So I was like, I need to, if I don't play this summer, I'm not going to play it, period. Like it's not, I'm never going to have the time for it. And so that's why I was like, I kind of just forced myself, and I bought that. And fun of that, because I was like looking for more stuff to play on my Switch, and I haven't gotten a chance to play the Mario Kart DLC yet. So I bought that, and I bought the, Mario Party game, but not the crappy one, not the Super Mario Party one, the collection.
The remake, I call it the remake of the other ones, right?
Yes, that one I just bought too. And I didn't report it because I haven't played it enough to report anything. I played like a handful of mini games, and they look and play great, but it's Mario Party. So I'll probably have more to report about that game. Why I bought that, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I was in a Mario Kart mood, and I thought, or not Mario Kart. I was in a Mario Party mood, and I was like, I want a Mario Party game, and I want one that I can buy and have the most stuff in it, so I don't have to buy multiple things. And I remembered randomly, I'm like, wait, didn't they do that? Didn't they like make a greatest hits? And I looked it up, and yes, and it basically is that. And so it's basically everything I wanted. I just wanted one Mario Kart game on a modern console with all the good stuff that is not crappy like that other one that they put out. So highly recommend that if you're looking for a party game and you only want to buy one and you don't want to track down random copies of Mario Kart 7. Like, there you go.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that.
But all right, I guess we could jump into one of our two stories. These are both pretty big stories, so it might go a little long, but it seems like we have a tentative, and I put tentative in a major bold there, ending to this Microsoft Activision acquisition saga thing. But who knows at this point what government agency is going to do what at this point. But apparently we have a decision on the recent trial between the FTC and Microsoft. Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley has ruled in favor of Microsoft, denying the FTC's preliminary injunction request. According to the judge, for reasons explained, the court finds that the FTC has not found shown a likelihood that it will prevail on its claim this particular vertical merger in the specific industry may substantially lessen competition. To the contrary, the record evidence points to a more consumer access to Call of Duty and other Activision content. The motion for a preliminary injunction is therefore denied. Also, the CMA in the UK and Microsoft have reached a mutual agreement to pause any litigation on the UK. Again, pause. That's a key thing. They never said that they're getting rid of it and that everybody's in the clear and everybody's happy, honky-dory. They just paused it for now. The FTC appealed their loss in the Activision Blizzard case, but Judge Corley denied the FTC's appeal. And then lastly, according to Phil Spencer, Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. All right, so lots of news there. However, nothing is out of the scope of what you and I were basically fully expecting, which was the acquisition was probably going to go through, maybe with an amendment or two, and that they would probably sign something with Sony to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation. So all the people who were panicking saying that somehow it was going to become some Xbox exclusive, which would be the stupidest decision that Xbox could ever make, is to limit their player pool like that. I mean, on one hand, you say like, hey, we're losing and we have a smaller base and we'll never be able to beat PlayStation, so we're going to buy this and ensure that that entire base never gets to play it. Like, come on now. So, a lot of obvious things here, but basically just reaffirming a lot of expectations. Steve, what were your thoughts upon hearing all this news that came out?
Yeah, it's surprising but not, right? Like, this is what we kind of expected. We kind of expected the court to deny the injunction. We kind of knew that they didn't really have much leg to stand on, and they do in a sense, but it's something we completely already agreed on. We knew this is one of those things, like, we're talking about it so often, where it's like, we know it's going to happen, but it's going to be, pit stop, stop, pit stop. It's going to keep getting hit with these pauses, and that's always the big word where it stops. Yes, it's going to go up into the courts, and then most of the time, we don't know, something crazy could happen. Could work out, but I think PlayStation's at a point where they're over it. Well, again, they've signed this deal with Microsoft, binding them to. There's probably, I would like to see that document, because it's probably, I'm telling you, it's probably maybe a 10-year thing. Keeping,
certainly not indefinitely, but
it's not indefinite, but keeping Call of Duty on PlayStation for a certain amount. And that's the big one, right? I don't think PlayStation was too worried about losing certain other games, and there's other games that just going to exist, right? But it also works in Microsoft's way for more than one reason. We see Microsoft's sort of push on Activision already kind of coming to fruition. A big thing for Activision games on PC was that you had to go through the Blizzard launcher, basically, and that stuff is something we're starting to see go away more and more. They're just getting put on Steam. I think Overwatch is migrating over. Destiny, when Destiny left Activision, or Bungie, and that whole thing fell apart, that was ripped off their thing, and their launcher's terrible. It's pretty bad.
Most of them are,
and it makes it almost impossible to play stuff on like Steam Deck, which is a big thing. It is a big deal now. So it's one of those things where I took a sigh of relief. Where I know, again, we've always talked about how, to us, this doesn't affect us one way or another. We're gonna have the option to play these games wherever we want. But it was a sigh of relief where it's like, I think the industry's getting just sort of tired for this. I think for the people who were fighting against this, the small vocal minority of the PlayStation fanboys who were fighting it, I think they're over it. I think they realize, listen, they're gonna get Call of Duties longer than they are even gonna be buying Call of Duties on PlayStation. There's people who, we barely play Call of Duties now. And more people fall off every year. We've seen those numbers plateau. So the fact that I think it's gotten to the point where finally people are like, this is going to happen. We have to sort of get our caveat. Let's sign this deal for temporary. This will maybe get us through to the launch of PlayStation 6. We'll be getting Call of Duties, and it might go on more. If you want, for those fanboys who were dying for Call of Duty to stay on PlayStation, then you better buy it. I don't want to see you guys on Game Pass with us. You want it on PlayStation, buy it, because if the numbers start to dwindle there specifically, you're giving them more ammo. But when it comes down to this saga that's been going on, it's good to finally see sort of a horizon point, right, where we're getting to a point where it's like the details are coming out, it's starting to solidify, and because of all these lawsuits they've not lawsuits, but the injunction and stuff, they passed their first date that was supposed to close by, and they've extended it. Obviously, Activision wants to get bought out by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So they easily extended that date into this fall, which I'm assuming we'll start getting as we get closer final details. But it's one of those things where I wasn't shocked. I was just sort of almost relieved, where it's just like this thing is finally just kind of going through, and I want to see the outcome of it already. I want to see some of this stuff maybe starting getting put on Game Pass, and just to start seeing a little bit more what this purchase was really for, because I know everyone keeps going to the Call of Duty thing. I think this is a bigger deal than just Call of Duty. Especially for us, King is a huge one. I think people.
That's the thing. I think, to be honest with you,
so
in terms of money.
I think in terms of money, microtransactions, and the mobile market, I think they keep forgetting King. Again, Blizzard is its own thing. It is what it is. So that was sort of my reaction, where I was just like, this can finally start just happening. And not to be greedy, so I can go back on Game Pass and play stuff for $15.99 or whatever, $10.99 it is. But it's just that it's sort of put a hold in just this weird era of news where everything is always about this Microsoft Activision thing. So I'm finally kind of just sitting back being like, finally this is somewhat hopefully coming to an end.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think when you have mergers on this side, like, everybody's going to have their opinions. There's going to be people who I think are going to be stoked about it. There's going to be people maybe on the more fanboy side who's going to resist no matter who it is. There's going to be people who are principally against consolidation. You know, I kind of fall into that camp, but it regardless of who is buying what. But at this point, it's through. We all knew it was going to go through. So at this point, conversations regarding of like, oh, should they do this? Is this wrong? Blah, 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 blah. Like, it can happen, but the courts ruled what they're going to rule. So at this point, now I'm just fascinated. Okay, strategy time now. Like, let's see what Xbox does next. You know, what I'm most curious to see is, okay, now that this is through, the day one on Game Pass Call of Duty title is only, a couple years away, you think, at the most? You know, this is coming. I'm so curious to see what that does to the numbers, the specific kind of quantity. Like, does that move the needle at all? Like, obviously, it's going to engage a lot more people are going to be playing Call of Duty that otherwise would not be. But let's see if there's any real material fact to what Sony was concerned about, which is people jumping ship because of that day one. I don't see it, just because Call of Duty is one of those online type, like, play with your friend type of ecosystems, and people don't switch sides because of that kind of stuff, which is, I feel like, much of Microsoft's argument, to be honest with you. Yeah. I think it would be one thing if these were, like, single-player type games, you know, but because these are these kind of online entrenched, been around since the PS2, but in its current iteration with Modern Warfare since 07 or something like that. These are like deeply entrenched people. Like, I don't see them switching platform, but I am kind of curious to see, like, does this move the needle on Xbox at all? This is one more thing that they can maybe be known for. And, you know, it's interesting. You were kind of mentioning the whole idea of not signing this kind of blanket statement of having this on PlayStation indefinitely. In business, nothing is indefinite other than maybe execs ownership over your IP or something like that. But in terms of kind of like sharing deals, I think this is going to be much similar to the Sony MCU Spider-Man treatment, where one party owns it, will let you use it, but we'll never give it to you because we always want to have that negotiating tactic. And that, I think, is going to be Microsoft's approach, which is like, they'll play ball with Sony so long as it makes sense. And I don't see it not making sense anytime soon. From what everybody's saying, we're talking about, it said like $800 million or something like that that's generated on the PlayStation side. That would have to significantly decrease for, I think, Microsoft to say like, it's not worth putting it over there, screw them. So in the meantime, they're going to be playing ball with them, but it is kind of, it's an interesting negotiation point with them, which is like, hey, you play ball with us and we'll make sure that keeps going over there, because despite what, you know, they've signed here, that doesn't take it off the table. They can pull that back at any point. You know what I mean? Like, There's nothing really stopping them. Like, I don't, they said like it's a binding agreement. I'm not privy to the paperwork. I don't know what the legal recourse for that is, but I think they're only subject to whatever that timetable is, and I don't see them signing anything ridiculous outside of what maybe a console cycle. So we're talking 7 to 10 years maybe. And then I would imagine, if anything, they're not going to just blindly re-sign it. They're probably going to look at the field and see what's changed in 7 to 10 years. And if PlayStation is just of consequence to the Call of Duty side, I'm sure they'll re-sign it because they'll profit from that as well. But, you know, if at any point, let's say, Microsoft's dreams come true and, you know, in 7 to 10 years, Sony's worst fears have actually happened, and there's just been a mass exodus due to Call of Duty being maybe on Game Pass or whatever. Again, this will never happen, but let's say there is, and everybody's like, all right, screw The Last of Us, I want to play Call of Duty for cheap, let's say. And they all go to Xbox so they can, I don't know, play Forza and Psychonauts 2. And then I would not be surprised in that situation where Microsoft's like, all right, screw it, we're taking off PlayStation. That's what I think it would take, because it would basically need, I think, to cost them more to keep it over there than to just centralize everything. And they are nowhere even near the install base to, I think, successfully pull something off like that. You know what I mean? Like it's one of the things where it's like an IP, is the IP worth more having that kind of universal access, aka like a Minecraft, or is it more profitable having it locked on your console like a Halo? And they assess these things dynamically, and I think there's no universe where Call of Duty makes sense to be an Xbox exclusive. Like I don't think they're stupid enough and selfish enough, I think, to lock it in over there, just because I think what would happen is if they made an exclusive, there wouldn't be a mass exodus. I think what would happen would be that a lot more people would stop playing Call of Duty, and it would give rise to something else and actually give a Killzone the chance. That's what I think would happen if they decided to do that, which again sounds ridiculous, but that I think more people would rather play something available on their console than completely buy a $500 new machine. I seriously doubt it. So yeah, no, it's kind of an inevitable decision, but and kind of unsurprising, but I am glad to see the big parts of the story kind of resolve so we can move forward and just see what the ripple effects of this decision is.
No, yeah, that's a big one. I'm really interested. You know, I don't care for these like sort of boardroom meeting style like watching this stuff, but this is just one again that's it's been what almost 2 years that we've been just back and forth on this, and I still remember waking up and seeing that announcement, and it's just being like, this is gonna have just a huge effect on the industry as a whole, you know, and it already has. So it is really where I'm just sitting back, just this is captivating. Like, man, if you want to make a movie about this, because I will watch it.
Yeah, because this goes back to this acquisition. I remember was happening right on the tail end of that whole Activision Bobby Kotick harassment, like all those lawsuit stuff. And that's why I think the acquisition kind of surprised so many people, because they're like, really, you want to buy them in the middle of this? And so, you know, that was like 2 to 3 years ago at this point. So the fact that this is kind of gone on this far, you know, God, I hope this is the last acquisition of this size that they try to make. But I seriously doubt it. I do think there's going to be larger bids by other parties to make stuff like this happen. But I think, if anything, this does set legal precedents for acquisitions of this size. That interesting, the idea of like vertical mergers versus horizontal mergers. And so long as you're not trying to like buy the ability to produce successfully in this industry, aka like chip manufacturers and stuff like that, I think that keeps things like the EAs, the Rockstars, Take-Two, whatever, they're on the table technically now that this has gone through. I think Ubisoft is probably my guess for the next one that's probably going to get bought out, just because they don't seem to be able to operate effectively on their own anymore. I guess that what is Ubisoft Quartz, that little NFT thing initiative, I guess that didn't pay dividends like they thought it was going to. So yeah, glad to be at the end of it.
Oh, for sure. We can, switching over to not something so controversial. The next big thing, PlayStation 5 Pro rumors once again, but of course, coming over from Tom Henderson, the more over at Inside Gaming, was a little bit more reliable than just the randos saying PS5 Pro, Switch Pro. I don't want to,
Yeah, not just a Reddit thread.
I don't want to hit that wound for you. So here's some of the rumored details. So, codename Project Trinity. It's been in development since early 2022, which lines up with some of this other stuff we have heard. Development kits would be going out in November of this year, which again would all plan out. Accelerated ray tracing, and targeting November 2024 release, which again would make sense with some of this other stuff that actually Tom Henderson has sort of leaked and talked about in rumors, where this year we might be getting a PS5 Slim / that plug-in disc reader for the digital consoles. So everything is starting to look at it. It's more of a thing of when it happened. I'm more curious to see how this would all really work out in a world. What exactly are you, quote unquote, proing in the difference? The big one for PS4 to PS4 Pro was the whole 4K initiative, and that was sort of fake 4K in a sense. So it'd be really interesting to see what would be maybe looking for a more consistent thing. I was, again, not shocked. I'm more shocked that we haven't heard of this already, that they haven't announced this yet. We're going in, 3 years since the launch. We're about to be in that point where we thought we'd probably get a PS4 Slim, PS5 Pro, PS5 Slim. So what were your initial reactions to this? I know it's a little bit more credible in a sense, but it's stuff we've sort of heard already.
Yeah, normally I don't give too much credence to all these leaks because or rumors or whatever, because there's constantly like a rumor for something. Then Switch 2 got announced for this thing, on Facebook somewhere. But yeah, Tom Henderson, I do know, has gotten a lot of things right previously, and even things that I remember him reporting about that I actually didn't quite believe, like the Project Q thing. He ended up actually being correct about, because again, it sounded kind of ridiculous. I was like, a cloud device from Sony? Yeah, I don't know about that. But no, he was correct on that. So he's a relatively credible source. So yeah, this seems in line with what you'd imagine if you look at, like, especially the last cycle. I know people go to previous cycles, but with the kind of established like Pro models, we're If the November 2024 date does hold, that means, we'd be 4 years into the life cycle, which is about the halfway point, what you'd imagine. 8 would be on the tail end, but 7 to 8 years is about the life cycle of a console these days. So 4 years in, I think, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the questions would be like, what would it do different? Like, I feel like we're in a weird position where I still feel like lots of devs haven't fully gotten the opportunity to take advantage of the PS5 hardware anyways, even yet. We're still seeing some games that I think are reminiscent of maybe what you would have saw last gen with maybe a higher resolution or something like that. But I still feel like devs are still trying to crack the how to get 60 FPS 4K thing. I think that's still something that is kind of not an easy thing to achieve. You get a lot of concessions. You get the 4K, or you get the 60 frames per second, but I don't think many devs have been able to successfully do both. And so is this going to close that gap? I don't know yet. You need a pretty solid rig in the PC space to accomplish that as well, unless the game is like super optimized. There are games that are like ridiculously optimized that I've seen people be able to run at super high resolution, super high frame rates with like medium rigs. I've seen that before. But the average game is not. You have games like Exoprimal that you could be running that on like a 1080 and the frame rate's probably not going to be amazing. It's one of those things where it makes sense. It checks out to me. The timeline seems right. I've heard some people talk about how this is way too early for a Pro model. And if anything, I would just like to remind people that you cannot go from, let's say, November 2024. You can't go from when you got the console to 2024. That's too early. It's from release to 2024. And I know it's like a controversial thing because like so many people didn't have the console anywhere close to launch because of the pipeline, and is just a small subset of people that did have it, like you and I. That's kind of like the narrative. But the reality is millions of people did have the consoles. They were just a nightmare to get. And there was nothing extra. There was nothing floating around extra that you could pay MSRP for. And a lot of scalpers had, it was a nightmare. I understand that. But the console has been out for 3 years. And so, we're going on a technological development schedule, not necessarily like when was it widely accessible? Oh, that's when you get it. Start the countdown from here. Now it's 4 years from there or whatever. Okay. That's just not how it works. The tech keeps going. The developers, again, I feel like if anything, the developers asking for more power is the motivating force, much more than like, hey, when did a wide swath of people be able to get our console? Because the reality is the hardcore, who I feel like are the ones who even gravitate towards the Pro models, get the console regardless of when it comes out. The reality of it is there is a contingent of the Sony base, because again, Pro models market towards people who want high-end experiences. Those people are not necessarily super concerned about like, did I get the biggest bang out of buck for my buck, like out of this console? Like they probably could have dropped a Pro model 2 years after, and there would be a subset of the base that would have bought it anyways, like you and I, unfortunately. And is that a good thing? Probably not, but it's something we do nonetheless. That's just a concession of being a big fan of the medium. And so yeah, that's one of the things where it's like, I think when you're talking about slim models and like cutting down pricing and trying to make a more accessible thing, that's when I think it makes a little bit more sense. I was like, okay, when did people last even like widely adopt this console? Like, is it too soon to even introduce a new model? That I think makes more sense. Like for example, Nintendo waited a decent amount before they introduced their kind of like light model, because that's like the low cost barrier. People are not necessarily like looking for the high end experience when going to the light model, so it makes sense to be more conscientious of when it releases in relation to the launch of the console. But Pro models, I just don't feel it. Like, that's why like Apple is able to drop like so often super expensive crazy things, because the people who are interested in that will adopt the next tech regardless of when it comes out. And I think that the phone space understands that. The console space is kind of just a little different in that regard, where people are still, I think, getting used to the idea of the fact that there might be a higher end model that's going to start being released that might not be for you. You know what I mean? Like, once upon a time, if you had a PS2, you had a PS2, and they do like a Gen 2, Gen 3 mad years later. Same thing with PS3. You get the Slim, and then you get the weird grill one that you have. The only person with a grill model PS3. Shout out to you.
I have a fat one as
well. But yeah, like, I think we're just moving more to the phone models, where like there's just going to be a subset of the base that is going to upgrade no matter what, regardless of the timing. And I think they're like more paying attention to that, regardless of when you got it. So I'm down for it. I'll probably get it, most likely, depending on the pricing and what it even upgrades. If it doesn't upgrade barely anything, if it's like a negligible increase in power, I'll probably hold off, so long as my PS5 is still working. I held off, for example. I didn't get a PS4 Pro because I just didn't see the bump in quality in relation to the timeline that really justified the expense at that point. But if they are, my big thing is performance. Resolution's cute and all, but resolution only goes as far as your TV does. I have a 4K unit, but it's not like I have some insane OLED that can really show anything any prettier. Like, HDR is what it is, you know what I mean? So for me, it's like, if this new machine, let's say the PS5 Pro, guarantees super high frame rates on everything, oh yeah, I'm in, because frame rate's my big thing. But like, if it's like, depending on the developer, that's kind of the space we're in right now, I'll probably hold off. I don't feel the need to immediately upgrade. But by November 2024, I might have a different opinion. It's been 4 years out as opposed to 3 years out. I'm already pretty happy with my PS5. I've had it since launch, like you have, so it's not like there's like brand new hardware for us. So I don't see necessarily a bad thing to fork out some more money for a new unit, especially if it's like designed well. You know, like the PS5 is kind of an interesting designed console. So if this is maybe a little bit more compact or designed a little different, maybe it'll motivate me a little bit more. But, you know, the price thing is a big thing for me. Like, if this Pro model is like $600, $700, nah, I'm good. Nah. It would have to be a proper upgrade for me to justify that expense. But what are you thinking? Is this something you think you would get, per se?
Yeah, it comes down to what is they upgrading. You know, that's the issue where if they're gonna come, you know, and I always think about it right now. If I were to go back in time, I wouldn't have really gotten a PS4 Pro.
Yeah.
I was caught up in the hype in a in a sense that I got it, but because the 4K was very pick and choose. Like, you know, that's why they specifically chose their first parties. Like, they had their God of War at the time. They were like, it's a 4K patch to this. And again, it was all checkerboard 4K. It wasn't true 4K.
Yeah.
And that whole nonsense. So that's the thing now. If they're gonna come and be like, well, now you can, you know, now certain games can get updated to have a 4K 60. It just, again, it's just like, well, does that matter really? I mean, my PC could do some crazy, and I'm more of a frame rate guy as well. It's like, yeah, but on my PC, you know, 1440 at 60 looks beautiful, you know, and certain
totally.
games and certain games I'll leave it at 1440, and not really I don't really ever go more than like 120 frames because there's no
can't even detect it beyond that. But.
There's no need to for that nonsense. Yeah. But that's what I try to think, you know, especially when I'm sitting there playing Final Fantasy 16. I'm like, how does it get better than this? You know, and not to be facetious or anything like that, but I'm like, this game, again, I have it on performance mode. I'm like, looks like what I would want it to, plays like what I want it to. It loads instantly. The PS5 takes longer. The PS5 takes longer to turn on than it does for me to launch and load up my file and start playing Final Fantasy 16. It's a ridiculous. It's so crazy, right? It's nuts how fast that game loads. So
yeah, especially if you hit the continue game version. Have you ever done it that way instead of my god?
Yeah, I don't load my file. I always just hit continue, and it's just black and it fades in, and the game is loaded. I don't get it. So when we're you know, there's the PS5 still blowing me away sometimes with the games and who the developers are. So it does make me think, like, well, what are you gonna do? What is it? Are you gonna just slap a 2 terabyte in there, or well, actually no, they only sell them for 500. So, you know, what is it that you're gonna be slapping in there that's gonna be worth this price? You already have your DualSense Edge out there, so it's not like you can pack in that. And they wouldn't for that price.
I'd hope not. You know how expensive that would be.
Yeah, you're looking at a $1,000 bundle there. So it's like, what is it that it's gonna offer me? And that's my big thing. And it's the price point as well. You know, my PS5. Besides my one issue with the one game I can't play on my PS5 being The Last of Us Part 1, what would I need a new PS5 for? In a sense, to do what exactly? So unless you're telling me that it'll do performance even better than it's doing now, I don't really see a world where I'm like, yeah, let me drop $500-$600 on it. To add nothing to add a very, you know, my TV's from like 2016, so yeah, it's a 4K TV, so it's only limited what it can do. It's not these QLED, OLEDs, Samsung crazy TVs, because that's another big investment you'd have to do. So it's like, what's the point of it? Is for me anyway, for people who don't have it, for the people who love to have new technology, for the people who buy iPhones every single year, you know, not just so you can have a small tiny feature that someone else might not have. I'm all for it. I was at a point in my life, I was that person who wanted the new technology every single time that there was a new version of it. But you grow over that sensation, but some people don't. So even if the PS5 Pro is a minute upgrade, and it may not be for me, it may be for someone. I'm not mad. I'm not gonna be like, why would you buy a PS5 Pro when you could save this? No, if you want to play that way specifically, then I'm not mad at it. It's just this is gonna be one that you're gonna have to do some hard convincing, and some good marketing to convince me to get rid of my PS5 or sell my PS5 or keep both, to get the PS5 Pro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also like to make a note that just because a console can do something doesn't mean that it's going to do that across many games. I will also note that technically, I believe the PS5 Pro or the PS5 base unit is capable of doing 8K, and it's capable of doing over 60 frames per second. How many games do you see taking advantage of that? Because not every developer is the same. Not every engine's the same. And so that's another thing where it's like they can sell me on all these features, but until I can see developers actually extract that power, it's not really a compelling selling point for me. And I will also note that I've seen some people not particularly keen on the idea of pro models, especially on previous console cycles. I will like to also note that not all pro models are made equal. Yes, the PS4 to PS4 Pro wasn't like this astronomical leap. It didn't make sense for some people. Maybe you could say a lot of people. But I would also be remiss to not mention there was the Xbox One to One X jump. And now the One X was a solid pro model. And that was also a pro model, just like the PS4 Pro. So so much of it is dependent on kind of like where you're starting and what the pro model is doing and how does it optimize. And I feel like the One X optimized in a beautiful way over the original model. In the PS4 I think kind of came out of the gate with a lot more solid of an experience. So it was a little bit maybe harder to proify it, if you will, than Xbox. That say what you want. I like the Xbox One, but the launch VCR version was a clunky hunk of junk. It was. So, it was maybe easier to sell a pro model for when you have a tougher kind of enter the gate. Right now, we're in a position where, and I would imagine, Xbox is going to have some kind of pro model around the same time as well. They tend to work in tandem in that way, within, a year or so of each other. Both these consoles I think are pretty solid. Like, say what you want about the Series S and X, but I don't think it's their design that's the issue with them. It's the game availability. And so, yeah, we're in a place right now where I think we have two really solid consoles. How do you make a pro version of that? All you can really do is add more power. I think they both have decent, heat distribution systems. I think they both load. I mean, the PS5 loads amazingly and blisteringly fast, so long as the developer takes advantage of it. And the Xbox has Quick Resume, which is even faster. You could just not even close the game altogether for many games, not all games. Some games close no matter what, aka like Assassin's Creed Valhalla will not stay open for me. It just is what it is. I don't know. But yeah, like these consoles are really well designed off rip. So a pro model can maybe be a little harder to sell, and maybe looking towards the past won't be the closest analog to what we're going to actually experience going forward, because it was such a different generation, last generation, because of, Xbox was so far behind in terms of what the hardware. I mean, you remember that, what was it, 900p thing that they were doing at that time? Yeah. So
I think Rise, the Spartan game.
Exactly. And so things are a lot closer now in terms of power. So the pro models are going to have a different strategy when they come out. So looking back towards the PS4 Pro and the One X I don't think are the necessarily applicable point that a lot of people I think are mentioning about. I think there's some caveats there that people need to be conscientious about that. This is still a little bit uncharted waters, because I think what these consoles look like might be something different than we've ever seen before.
I think so as well. We are in a different era. That's why when people talk and the way we talk about this generation is going to be a lot smaller. The gap is going to be a lot shorter. People freak out. I just bought this machine. Oh, take it easy. It does. Realize that some of the stuff, just because one system does. I do know one person who, for some reason, played God of War Ragnarok on his PS4.
Yeah, shout out to him. Good for him.
Launch PS4, and let me tell you, he says that thing was screaming. But there are people who are out there, so we are in a weird generation. I think the PS5 generation to PS6 generation, including this PS5 Pro transitional sort of console, is going to be weird because we are minutely upgrading. Go look at people who have on the PC spec. Oh, I got a 3040, 3060, and I got a 3070. Now we have the 40s. The upgrades are so small. They're like, you can show me the benchmark card you want. Let me tell you, you're not doing that stuff within game. So we are in a new phase of console gaming.
Yeah, and I'll close out with this. I feel like and this is not an uncommon thought, but the pro idea, I think, was very much informed by what we were seeing over there in the phone market. And I don't think that level of influence is going to stop there. So for anybody, I think that is upset with this maybe like 4-year turnaround for a Pro model, just wait, because I think the console manufacturers, when it's all said and done, are going to want to condense the life cycle of a console anyways. Not all of them. I think Nintendo, for example, has a vested interest in wanting to keep these generations maybe on the longer end, but I would not be surprised if you start seeing these times getting a lot shorter. So the time between the Pro model coming out and the PS6, and then the time where the PS6 and the PS7 comes out or whatever, these times I think are going to get shorter and shorter with each release, because I think they are headed towards a phone model, and it's going to eventually, I think, become like a, if you're a hardcore, you're going to upgrade it every time, and eventually you just stick with what hardware you want. And it's not going to be the laissez-faire, I think, like Xbox, like, hey, play anything, anywhere type approach. Sony, I think, is going to still want you to upgrade. But I think the amount of times and expectations are going to shift dramatically. And eventually, do I think they're going to move to a yearly model for consoles? Hell no. I don't think so about that. But I do think these times are going to condense. So I'm not saying get used to it, but I'm just saying be aware that if you think that this is short, I think you're going to see some shorter times going forward that are going to knock your socks off, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so that's our 2 stories this week. Pretty short show, but really great stories to kind of talk about. And now we're fully in the swing of summer. Got some really great games coming out that I'm really excited for. And I think we're going to have a little bit of a, not a dead period, but a catch-up period, if anything. Because I know the next big game that I'm excited for is Lies of P, which I don't think is until September. So we have a bit of a breathing time here to kind of catch up on some stuff. So I'm excited to talk about what we've been playing in the subsequent episodes, because I would imagine there's probably going to be some nutty stuff that from our backlog that can probably pop in there now that we have a little bit of a breathing time, even though I know you're still finishing Final Fantasy 16. So
yeah, I am. And I also, it's funny, I look down and I see it on my desk. I forgot, I got Forspoken waiting for me to dive in. So
oh my god, I want to try that.
That'll be a fun one to it'll be a fun one to let you know how it is.
Yeah, you got to report back to me, because I have this morbid curiosity about it, where it's like I played that demo, and what I played, like, so the writing was ridiculous, but like from a gameplay perspective, what I played wasn't so atrocious that like I didn't want to touch it again. It was more so like, I don't know if this game's going to be for me, and there's plenty of things that are out right now that are for me, so I kind of, it just completely left my radar. And also, every time I've checked it to be like, oh, you know what, let me maybe look into Forspoken, I'm not paying that price. I think it was like the full 70. I was like, there's no way I'm paying $70 for that.
Yeah, that's why I snagged that $21 on Gamefly.com.
You see, yeah, 21 is like that was always my thing, and I put things on my wish list where it's like $30 is my sweet spot. Any of these games that go below 30, that like, so long as I know it's not complete garbage, you don't have to sell me much. Like if it goes below 30, like I'm on it. But Forspoken for 70 is crazy. So yeah, you got to let me know, because that one is something I feel like right now would be kind of a perfect time for me to jump into. Yeah, no, like I definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, I'll report to you whenever I get a chance to get started with it.
All right, for sure. So this was the NeoVintage podcast. Just 2 guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming. I'm Jabron. I'm here with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
See you guys at the next episode. See ya.